They gave up a month at his claim camp until she breathed new life into the gold baron's ghost town. They were pulling down the sign when the stage rattled in, a splintered board stenciled 30 days ago in red paint that had already surrendered to the wind. Camp, 1 month only. 2 men yanked it off the bunkhouse porch and tossed it face down like a card they were sick of losing with. Boots scuffed. A nailed window sighed. The town woke the way a body wakes after a fever. Lighter, shakier, not at all sure it wants to stand. May Delaney stepped down from the stage with a carpet bag, a dented tin bucket, and a length of canvas that could be a bedroll or a miracle if you needed one. She was smaller than the dust tried to make her, hair braided and pinned, sleeves rolled to the forearms like someone who did not care if her dress learned to work. She looked at the board on the ground and at the shapes behind it, boarded mercantile, doorless assay office, a bell in the little church that had forgotten the name of Sunday. Heat crowded the street, and then stepped back, as if even the weather was embarrassed to watch a place give up. "Month's up," a man announced, brushing his hands, as if time were a mess you could clap off. "Pack it. Kincaid's camp is a ghost now." May bent, flipped the board with her boot. Behind it lay a script chit stamped 1 month, pay due. The stamp had bled. The date was a question. She put the chit in her pocket the way you keep a truth you're not ready to argue with. A man with a foreman's ease and a thief's careful hands fit a padlock through the pump-house latch. He was clean where widows' wells are never clean. His vest didn't know grease. "Reeves," someone whispered, and the name travelled like a fly lands. A little circle, then gone. "Ma'am," Reeves said pleasantly, as if he were always in the habit of welcoming strangers to funerals. "Private property. Pumps are shut. Men gave a month and left. Nothing here but boards to sell and a fine view of your own bad luck. You can ride back on the coach. Save yourself the favour of hope." May looked past him at the pump-house, at the scar where water once came out, now gathered into a dull eye of iron. Beyond that, the mill wheel hung like a stopped heartbeat. She set the bucket down, untied the canvas, and brought out a coil of rope, a brace of tools that didn't match, and a round of cloth that could be a filter or a flag. "I'm not here to buy bad luck," she said, voice even. "I'm here to fetch water." He smiled like a man who would be patient until he didn't have to be. "I admire the economy. You and your bucket can fetch the wind." She walked past him and touched the pump handle, 2 fingers only. Metal was hot. The smell told her more than the sight. Old iron, old sweat, a newer tang of something that had no business at a drinking pump. She wrapped the handle in a rag and tried the lever. It moved reluctantly, like an animal that had been told too often it wasn't welcome. Nothing rose but the memory of water. The coach rattled back out the way it had come, feathering the street with a departing promise. A woman opened a door 3 inches and then locked it again, habit keeping time without asking permission. A hound looked at May and decided not to judge. She took off her hat, wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, and looked around for a door that might open. The mercantile was shut, boards inside the windows, as if the shop itself had boarded up its own heart. But the bell over the door was the kind you can hear whether you admit you're listening or not. May knocked. The door opened just far enough to let a voice out. "I'm closed," the voice said, sharp and tired and careful. "I'm not buying," May replied. "I'm here with a bucket and a question." The door opened another inch, then 3. A woman with a storekeeper's spine and a widow's eyes took her in, then looked past her at Reeves and the padlock and the way heat sat on the roofs. "Mrs. Bell," she said, "because names are what hold a place up when beams fail. You're either foolish or hired." "May," the new woman answered. "Neither. Hungry, mostly, and thirsty. I can fix one faster than the other if you have flour, yeast that remembered something, and a stove that doesn't lie." Mrs. Bell's mouth betrayed her by wanting to smile. "Yeast that remembered something," she repeated, and stepped back to let May in. The store smelled of wood that had known winter and summer, sacks of grain, broken promises named 12 ways. On the back shelf, a jar held a rubber of sourdough that had gone grey around the edges and kept its stubborn bubble in the middle, like hope does when no one feeds it. May tipped the jar, sniffed, and nodded. She's sleeping, not dead. She loosened the cloth, fed the starter flour and warm water, whispered the kind of nonsense women use to coax miracles out of what other people stepped over. Mrs. Bell watched, without pretending not to. "You can have flour on credit," the storekeeper said, fussing with her ledger as if it were a shawl. "If credit still means what it used to, Kincaid stopped paying men in cash 2 months ago. Script's only good if Reeves says it is. Reeves says whatever suits Reeves." May laid coins on the counter, 2 silver pieces that looked like they had met a river somewhere, and learned to be polite. "I have enough for bread," she said. "And I need a length of lampwick, a handful of nails, and a strip of canvas if you've got a rag you don't love." "Got plenty of those," Mrs. Bell said. She scowled toward the pump house. "What you'll be needing is a key." "I'll be needing a lever more," May said, "and a place to build heat." They walked to the square together. Reeves watched them like a man who has decided to let you learn your lesson where he can enjoy the view. May found the community oven, stone belly cold, ash sleeping under the grate, the last loaf's ghost as faint as a dream. She cleaned the hearth while the starter woke, hands moving with a nurse's efficiency and a camp cook's economy. When she built the fire, she built it low and patient. "Why are you doing this?" Mrs. Bell asked, "instead of writing letters to men who are paid to care?" "Because letters don't draw water," May said. "And because I can't ask for help in a language I don't speak." She glanced up. "Where is Kincaid?" "Hiding from the weather," Mrs. Bell said, and didn't say whether she meant the sky or the men. "Sick, or tired of being the man people beg from. Reeves does the talking for him now." "Then we'll teach the town to talk to water before we bother talking to Reeves," May said. "Call people to the square at sundown. Bread attracts the honest and the hungry. If they're both, all the better." "Mrs." Bell rapped a spoon against a tin cup and did not care whether Reeves saw her do it. Word travelled the way heat does across a skillet when you've finally got the flame right. Doors opened, faces came to windows, and then to thresholds, and then to the square. The dough rose more than anyone expected. The town exhaled once, the soft sound bodies make when something familiar finally arrives. May cut a wooden paddle out of a crate slat, dusted it, slid the first round into the oven, and while it baked, shouldered her bucket and canvas and walked to the well by the pump house. She knelt and lay her ear to the stones like a woman greeting an old friend through a door. The heartbeat was there, faint, wrong, but present. "Get away from there," Reeves called. "You fall in, I'm not fishing." "I won't," she said, and dropped the rope hand over hand, letting the bucket's weight teach the well its manners. When it struck hard, like iron on something that did not want to be struck. She hauled and found mud, leaves, and something slick that clung to the bucket like regret. She sniffed and did not say the word out loud. Oil. Machine oil, not the kind that keeps dough generous, the kind that makes a pump seize when a man wants it to. "Mrs." Bell hovered with a lantern and a look that would have been gossip if it weren't so full of worry. "What's it saying?" "That somebody taught water to lie." May tied the strip of canvas into a cone, set it over the clean bucket, and poured the first haul through it. The filter shivered as the oil tried to have the last word. She set a second filter, then a third, breathing slow. The oven bellied heat into the square. The smell of bread moved like a hymn you didn't know you remembered until you heard other people try it. Children came first, thin with caution. Then men who had not moved all day because their pride is a kind of chair you can get stuck in. May gave the heel to an old miner who apologized for being the first in a voice that sounded like it had been spending sorrow, as if it were currency. "No, first," she told him, putting bread in his hand. All at once. Reeves moved in the crowd like a toothache through a jaw, smiling the way men smile when the only thing left to take is good feeling. "Look at this," he told a man beside him. "A picnic on a grave. Graves don't eat." the man muttered, and took a second slice when May offered and did not look Reeves in the eye. At sundown the heat eased, and the town made a little room around the well, as if it might be shy about remembering how to be useful. May tied a rag around the pump handle so hands wouldn't burn, and showed a boy where to stand, how to lean his weight into the lever on the downstroke and give the iron time to think on the up. "Don't force," she said. "Persuade." The boy laughed because being trusted is funny at first. The first water had no business being called water. It came up mud-grey and slow, with a bloom that caught the light wrong. Women stepped back. Men set their lips. Reeves folded his arms and showed his teeth the way men do when they can smell a speech they want to make. May kept her face quiet. She poured off a pint into a clean glass, and without making a sermon out of it, she dipped the lamp wick and set it near flame. The wick flinched like a startled cat. "Oil," she said to Mrs. Bell. "This well's been fed what it can't drink." "Accident," Reeves said. "Mine oil slops. You don't run a camp without—" "Mine oil doesn't climb," May said gently. "Not into a drinking well, not unless someone taught it to." She lifted her chin just enough to change the air. "Tomorrow, at first light, I'll open the screens, clean the uptake, and use a filter that's good enough to offend a liar. I'll need a wrench, a man who knows how to stand still while I blame the wrong bolt, and a loaf's worth of patience." "Who made you boss?" Reeves asked. It wasn't a question. It was a kind of bite. "No one," May said. "That's how towns die. So I'm borrowing the job until someone fancier wants it." She looked past him. "Tell Mr. Kincaid he's welcome to the first cup if he shows up without lawyers." A cough answered before Reeves could. Horace Kincaid stood at the edge of the light like a man rehearsing his own last entrance. He was tall under the coat. The desert had been eating one bite at a time, face wax pale, eyes careful. His cane's tip found the board sign, now foot-worn and ashamed of itself. "People worked a month," he said, voice hoarse but educated, like a schoolhouse that still remembers Latin. "They left when the luck did. That's arithmetic." "Bread says luck isn't the only number that matters," May answered. "Water says arithmetic changes if you clean the column." The crowd held its breath, the way crowds do when they want a permission they'll pretend they never asked for. Kincaid looked at Reeves, and then at the lantern soaking the air with its own idea of day. "We'll see," he said to Reeves, without moving his mouth much. To May, he said, almost politely, "If you make water come up clean, I'll pay for your flour myself." "I'll take that," Mrs. Bell said, quicker than forgiveness. "In coin, not scrip." Reeves laughed without humor. "If she makes water sing, I'll sign it in ink on my own hand." "Then bring a good pen," May said, and the town laughed, the kind of laugh that makes a spine straighten even if it's been bent all day. They ate the last of the bread under a sky that had dropped 1 degree toward mercy. A mother got a second slice with a look that said she was going to be mean to anyone who tried to take it from her child. Men made lists out loud, because lists are easier to sleep under than wishes. Children ran in the dust and fell, laughing at the cold shock of finding the ground still there to meet them. The bell that had forgotten Sunday found a note no one expected, and gave it away twice. May washed the bucket, washed the filter, and washed the idea of failure out of her hands as well as she could. She tied the bucket with a fresh knot. She laid the tools flat like instruments that might be asked to save a life in the morning. Reeves clicked the lock through the pump house hasp again, making the kind of noise men make when they believe the loudest sound is the last word. She looked at him and smiled, because smiling is sometimes how you keep from cursing. "Keys are for doors," she said. "Wells open to patients." When the square had emptied to its usual ghosts, May went back to the well and pulled up one more bucket. She held it at eye level in the lamplight and watched the thin rainbow sigh across the skin of it. It had the pretty of a lie. She set it down with care and thought the kind of thoughts people mistake for prayer because they happen when it's dark and you're tired and you want something clean to be true. She could smell bread in the stones now, faint and stubborn, as if the town had a memory it was embarrassed to have lost. She folded the canvas, looped the rope, and picked up the script chit from her pocket again. 1 month. Pay due, the bleeding stamp insisted, as if a month could exhaust a place's right to breathe. Then we'll give it a second month, she said to no one, and to all of them. We'll give it a life. She blew out the lamp. The pump house sat with its padlock like a closed eye. Somewhere under the street something moved, a slow, wrong motion that didn't belong to water and didn't belong to sleep. May's hand went to the wrench she didn't have yet and held empty air like it was a promise she intended to collect at dawn. Dawn bent its ear to the well. May arrived with a borrowed wrench, a coil of rope, and a consent the town hadn't yet given but was beginning to want. She unlatched her sleeves, tied her hair tighter, and set Mrs. Bell's canvas filters on the stone lip like folded flags waiting for wind. Reeves stood by the pump house with his key like a king with his last coin. "No entry," he sang, and the padlock flashed in the early light. "Company liability. City man could ride through any day, and I don't intend to be found generous." "Then don't be," May said. "Be useful." She knelt, unrolled the rope, and fashioned a slipknot a mule would have respected. "Open the door." Or I open the uptake cage from this side with my hands and your name becomes a joke." She glanced up with the plain kindness of a woman who had seen chest wounds and knew when a man was bluffing. "I'm not here to embarrass you, Mr. Reeves. I'm here to make your day easier to defend." Something in that sentence slipped past his polish. He looked at the square, at men pretending not to watch, at Mrs. Bell with a kettle like a cudgel, at the silent bunkhouse windows that had seen men leave with their shoulders down. He pocketed the key and lifted the lock. 10 minutes, he said. "You break anything, you bought it." May entered the pump house and breathed the smell of long metal and dust and a sweetness that didn't belong oil. The room held the ghost of a hum that had been interrupted and had not forgiven anyone for it. She set her bucket down, picked up a screwdriver, and opened the grating that kept the pump's throat from swallowing rocks and excuses. "Who taught you to do that?" Reeves asked, not curious so much as offended that competence could happen without him. "Work," she said. "It's a stubborn teacher." She pulled the screen and held it to the light. The mesh glistened with a thin film that caught the morning like a cheap trick. She scraped a finger across it, rubbed thumb to finger and watched the smear resist, asking water to be water. "Whoever did this didn't spill," she said to Reeves. "They fed." He rolled his eyes hard enough to creak. "You think a camp foreman has time for alchemy? I think a foreman has time for arithmetic," she said. "Camp can be sold dearer dead than alive if the pumps die first." She rinsed the screen in a bucket, changed the canvas, and set the mesh back. "Let's see if the well wants to forgive us." She wrapped the handle in cloth and nodded to the boy who had learned the lever yesterday. He leaned his weight correctly, careful not to hurry the upstroke. The pump coughed like a smoker, deciding whether to tell the truth. A ribbon of grey came up, then darker, then, after a long, offended pause, water the colour of tin with a skin that almost behaved. "Again," May said, and the boy obeyed. The second pull gave a half bucket a woman could consider if she were desperate, and a child had looked at her that morning like he expected her to be God. Mrs. Bell dipped the lampwick and held it to the lantern's lip. It did not flare. The wick steamed, and then thought better of drama. The crowd made that sound you only hear when hope realizes it is being invited to sit down. A horse came trotting from the ridge, with a man sitting it neat, hat down against the sun, a wooden case strapped behind the saddle, the way men strap tools they love more than company. He dismounted with a care that said he had learned to make precision look like ease. "Jonah Pike," he said, lifting 2 fingers in greeting. "Surveyor." He took in the open pump house, the rinsed mesh, the lever happy boy. "Looks like you've done a morning's work before breakfast." "May Delaney," she said. "Water finder today, cook if we get lucky." He smiled with half his mouth. The other half was busy measuring. He unstrapped the wooden case and set a brass transit on its tripod with the ceremony some men reserve for prayer. "I heard a rumor. You're trying to make this place run on something besides memory." "Right kind of rumor," Mrs. Bell said. "You bring a rumor that can do sums?" Jonah's eyes creased. I brought numbers that can do rumours. He sighted along the axis of the street to the mill wheel, then to the dry wash beyond. If the ground keeps the grade, I remember, the old sump should be down 2 feet from that wheel hub. If your well is lying, it's lying mainly about where it breathes. We can teach it manners. Reeves snorted. Teach the ground manners, he mimicked. Next you'll be teaching the sky. Sky doesn't take attendance, Jonah said mildly. Water does. He scribbled figures in a notebook whose cover had been mended twice with bootlace. He tested bearings, adjusted legs, looked at the world through glass that taught distance to be honest. You can hear it if you stop wanting to talk first. As if the thought had summoned him, an old man appeared at the edge of the square, leading a small, broad-shouldered horse with a coat the colour of rocks that had known sun. His hair fell in 2 grey ropes, and his shirt had beadwork so worn it looked like memory more than decoration. He didn't make a speech. He put his hand on the ground and then on the stone lip of the well and listened the way a man listens to a child who is ashamed. Noko, May said, surprised into a smile. She didn't have to manage. You said you'd come when the ground started talking. It's a murmur. Can you hear words? He put his ear closer. It says sorry with a stiff tongue, he answered. He stood, eyes on Jonah's tripod. Your glass is a good liar when a man wants to fool himself. You don't. I prefer to be corrected by steel, Jonah said, tapping the leg. Moves slower than my pride. Noko looked at Reeves long enough to be polite, and then let his eyes fall to the pump handle, the wraps of cloth, the bolt that had been scraped by a wrench too large. When a man doesn't want a town to drink, he puts the smallest wrong on the largest bolt, he said. Looks like clumsiness. Feels like grief. Reeves's smile narrowed. You give lessons for free, or do we pay you in bread? Pay me by listening, Noko said. He picked up a reed from the trough where weeds had lived a lazy life and cut it with a small, bright knife. He slipped one end into the crack by the uptake and put the other to his ear. Breathing is better, he said after a moment. Still has oil in it. Oil remembers faster than water forgets. May took the bucket and poured through the canvas again. The face of the water no longer wore the rainbow lie. It looked back like something that might start to trust people again, given enough good afternoons. She wet her lips with it and closed her eyes. Not clean, she declared, but the roads pointed there. She gave the first cup to Mrs. Bell, who put 2 drops on her tongue and made a face that was almost a laugh. Jonah folded the transit and set a stake with a nail cross on top. If you can give me 4 boys who don't mind carrying twine, and 3 men who've learned to dislike Reeves, I can pull a grade line to the sump, he said. We'll cut a relief slot that lets back pressure breathe instead of spitting in your well. You can have my boys, a woman announced, shoving 2 forward as if they were both too brave and not brave enough. And I've got a brother who never liked Reeves fine. Perfect, Jonah said. Hating is not as good as arithmetic, but it pulls in the same direction for a few hours. They worked. Work is the only language people share when words have spent themselves. Jonah ran line, the boys staked and stretched. Noko walked the verge where Sage leaned, watching for places where plants had learned to point their thirst like compass needles. May kept water arriving and arriving cleaner. Mrs. Bell distributed cups with the severity of a quartermaster who expects thank yous and silence. By noon, the pump gave water that tasted more like tin than regret. People stopped spitting after they swallowed. A woman held her baby's mouth to the cup and cried only as much as was necessary to keep the crying from becoming a habit. Men straightened without knowing it. Reeves leaned against the pump house doorframe in a position he probably practiced in mirrors, casual, amused, above it. Jonah tapped the stake, adjusted a line, and grunted satisfaction. Cut here, he told the brother who didn't like Reeves, and the man put a pick into the dry wash, where the grade line smiled and said, Please. Dust rose and settled as if it had been expecting this invitation all month. Noko watched a stand of grass change its mind about which way to lean, and nodded like a doctor listening to a chest. It'll hold, he said. "Afternoon," said a voice that preferred being obeyed to acknowledged. Reeves stepped into the square with a paper in his hand that had more signature than sense. "Notice of auction, gentlemen, ladies, and whoever else intends to live in a place that has forgotten why it was built." He held the document up so sunlight blessed it. 7 days from today, the Kincaid camp will be offered for sale as surplus and salvage. That's legal. That's arithmetic. "You don't have 7 days of dignity left," Mrs. Bell muttered. "You're spending it like biscuits at a wake." May wiped her hands and looked at the paper. Her face did not change. 7 days, she said mildly. "Good. That's time to make a town." "Or bury one," Reeves said pleasantly. He passed the notice to the telegraph post and tacked it hard enough to pretend it knew how to stay put. "Bidders will be entertained by the bank agent, not by women with buckets." "Men with buckets scare you?" May asked. "They bore me," he said. Jonah took the paper down without asking and read the names at the bottom. "Bank agent," he said. "Reeves and—" He squinted. "A signature I recognize from a ledger who owes Mrs. Bell money he thinks she forgot." He handed the notice to Mrs. Bell. "You can keep it. I prefer to remember things without help." Reeves didn't reach for the paper. He tapped the post instead. 7 days, he repeated to the square. "Do your little chores. Bake your charity bread. At the end of the week, arithmetic will stand you up in a room and tell you who owns you." "Arithmetic works both ways," Jonah said. "You can add water to a sum, and it changes the answer." Reeves's gaze slid to May. "Tell your help," he said, mild as poison, "that if he wants to keep working in this county, he'll learn when to count and when to keep quiet." Jonah's mouth made a shape Reeves probably hadn't seen since he was a boy, caught throwing rocks at a church window. Then the surveyor laughed, and it wasn't cruel, which made it worse. "You can teach me to keep quiet when my glass stops being honest." Noko stepped between them, without looking like he was stepping between anyone. "The ground is ready," he said. "It will take your cut and give you back the sound of a well that doesn't want to die." He held the reed to May. "Let it sing while you work. People trust songs before numbers." May put the reed to the crack and heard the whisper of water relearning itself. She looked up at the faces, lined, stubborn, tired, capable of loyalty if given somewhere to put it. "We work until the sun forgives us," she said. "Then we sleep, and tomorrow we make the rumor true for anyone who wasn't brave enough to come watch today." She glanced at Reeves. "Bring your bankman. Bring his pen. Bring your arithmetic." "Gladly," Reeves said. "I like watching hope argue with paper." He tipped his hat at Kincaid's shuttered porch, as if it were a person he had just insulted. "I'll be at the bunkhouse, cataloguing your memories for sale." He left with his 2 men, one carrying a hammer the way boys carry slingshots when they aren't allowed to show they're frightened. The square exhaled, then inhaled again, because breathing is a habit you have to keep practicing in places like this. Work resumed with the jittery calm that follows a near accident you pretend was planned. Jonah set 2 more stakes and a line that would let the relief slit find the sump without stealing strength from the well. May and Mrs. Bell trained another boy on the lever. Noko drifted to the edge of town, where the earth had changed color in a way most people would have called uninteresting. He knelt, pressed his palm, and smiled to himself with all the teeth he had left. By evening the pump gave water that did not shame a cup. May washed the tools and her hands and the day off her face. Jonah walked the grade path one more time, like a man checking his own heartbeat before sleep. Mrs. Bell handed out the last of the bread, saving the heels for the children who liked crusts because they made you work for your bite. Kincaid came at twilight without Reeves. A cane, a cough he tried to keep inside, and a hat he took off because he still remembered how to honor a town, even when he was not sure he had one. He drank one mouthful and closed his eyes hard. When he opened them, the square looked less like a place that had betrayed him and more like a place he had failed. "I won't promise anything," he said. "I've been bad at that lately, but I won't stop you." "That helps," May said. "Tomorrow we blew the well and put watchers at the sump. If the stream is still married to the mill, it'll show its ring. Kincaid frowned. It will look like a parlour trick. It will look like proof, Jonah answered. Parlour tricks don't get your name off an auction poster. Kincaid laughed once, and the cough took the rest of the laugh away. He raised his cane like a toast. 7 days, he said to May and Jonah, and the part of himself that still believed the right kind of work could fix a wrong kind of story. Spend them for me. He turned to go, then hesitated. Reeves thinks he runs the arithmetic, he said quietly. He does not. He runs the ink. If you dry up the well he writes in, his math gets lonely. May nodded. Then we'll let water do the speaking, and we'll teach ink to listen. Night took the square back into its old posture, less empty than it had been at dawn. The notice on the post fluttered in a wind no one admitted they were grateful to feel. The pump-house door sat open without looking vulnerable. The bucket, upside down to keep the dust out, looked like a drum waiting to be asked for a song. May lay on a cot, Mrs. Bell had found in the back, staring at a ceiling that had forgotten it could shelter people and was being reminded. She counted backward from 7, not because sleep required numbers, but because numbers had been invited to the argument, and she wanted them on her side. In the half-waking minute before dreams claimed the foreman's key, she heard the reeds whisper under the floorboards, and it said the same word over and over, almost. At first light, a boy banged a spoon on a pan, the way boys do when they want to feel like bells. May sat up, braided her hair tighter, and went to the square. Jonah was already at the transit, and Noko had a new read. Mrs. Bell had flour under her nails and a private prayer in her pocket. Reeves arrived last, a folded smile in his mouth and a pen behind his ear like a knife. We blew at noon, May said, loud enough for the shy to hear. Watchers at the sump and the mill. If the rumor is true, it'll come back to us honest and blue. If it isn't, we'll know who lied. She didn't look at Reeves when she said it, which was its own kind of looking. Reeves tapped the auction notice with his knuckle as if to check whether paper could bruise. 6 days, he said, and smiled at the arithmetic he thought would be faithful when people weren't. 6 days, May echoed, and smiled at the rumor that had begun to behave like a plan. Plenty. The town, which had not been asked to believe anything for a month, believed the only thing it could, what it had seen water do when a woman and a glass and an old man's ear reminded it how. The right kind of rumor walked down the street like a man the dogs chose to follow. Even the dust minded its manners. Noon came on like a drumbeat. By 11, the square was full of people who pretended they had come for errands and stayed because the day had decided to become a story. May laid out the plan once more. Clean, brief, the way you tell a frightened horse where the gate is. Bluing in the well at my mark, watchers at the sump and the mill spillway. If it's the same water, the blue comes back singing. If it doesn't, we stop telling ourselves pretty lies. Jonah checked the stakes, set the transit for the last time, and drew a little square in his notebook, as if to make a house for the number that mattered most. Noko sharpened his reed with a patient thumb and hummed something that might have been a lullaby or a warning. Mrs. Bell arranged cups the way quartermasters arrange courage. Children were assigned to count aloud. They took the job with the terrible seriousness of the young. Reeves arrived with the bank agent in tow, a soft man in a stiff suit whose hat shaded a face that liked agreements better than people. Mr. Carter, Reeves announced to no one in particular and everyone at once. He will take notes so your feelings don't trample the arithmetic. Feelings built everything you intend to sell, Mrs. Bell said, which made 3 men cough and 1 woman say, like a hammer settling on a nail. Kincaid came last, the cane tapping a metronome that made the room between beats feel like judgment. He took a chair in the shade, not because pride had left him, but because humility had started to learn its manners. Proceed, he said, voice raw. If there's a parlour trick, I prefer it be performed before the room is on fire. May lifted the packet of bluing. She did not rip it open with flourish. She asked the preacher to break the seal because he had hands people trusted to admit to what they had done. He did, and the blue dust hit the cup and turned water sky. May held it up so even the ones in the back could see that certainty is not always loud, then poured the colour into the well, steady, unhurried, counting the seconds between the first swallow and the third, the way a nurse counts breaths. "Positions," Jonah called, and his boys, now proud of being called that by a man whose tools shone, ran to the sump and the spillway, accompanied by two men with shirt sleeves rolled and skepticism rolled with them. Noko placed the reed, bent, and listened. He nodded once without smiling. "It goes," he said. "Silence has a sound. It is not absence. It is a whole choir holding its breath until the soloist finds the note. The square held that silence through 30 counted seconds, through 45. Somewhere a fly forgot itself and got the laugh it didn't deserve. At 52 seconds, the boy at the sump who had been in trouble all spring for throwing rocks shouted, voice cracking into a future where he might be useful. "Blue!" The shout planted its own seeds. The men at the spillway bellowed an echo. "Blue as sky!" The crowd surged and then checked itself because the smart part of a town knows not to crowd the proof. May let out a breath and looked at Reeves, not to gloat, but to see whether a man could learn anything this late in his life. His smile didn't break, but his eyes did a little work they weren't used to. Mr. Carter, the bank agent, removed his hat because even paper knows when it has been told to sit down. "This is most unusual," he said, which is what people say when they want to admit they've been wrong without paying for it. He turned to Reeves. "You will of course make a notation." "Of course," Reeves said, and did not write anything. Kincaid stood with effort and did a thing that changed the temperature by a degree. He clapped once, not loud, enough. "The camp runs on water," he said, as if reminding himself as much as the men who had stopped believing it mattered. "If the water remembers us, we might remember ourselves." A smell reached them then, not blue, not dust, smoke, subtle, wrong. May's head came up. Jonah's pencil stopped. "Where?" she asked the air, which is a question the weather will answer if you've been polite to it for long enough. A boy pointed with the all of him, not just his arm. "Belt House," he cried, and they saw it. A thin ribbon of dark releasing itself from the seam at the mill's roofline, like a bad thought escaping a careful mouth. May didn't wait for authority. She grabbed the bucket, shoved it into two other hands, and ran. Jonah was already moving, transit left on its tripod, like a promise he expected the town to keep for him. Noko handed his reed to Mrs. Bell and trotted with a speed that ignored the sum of his years. The Belt House had been quiet for a month. Leather dries when pride does, but someone had awakened a coil of lampwick, tucked it under a slat, and blown a kiss of flame into the dust. Fire eats old oil like gossip eats a quiet afternoon. When May shouldered the door, heat licked her face and tried to claim the oxygen in her lungs in one mouthful. "Line!" she shouted, and the town obeyed. Bucket to bucket, hand to hand, the old choreography of survival resumed as if no one had dared to forget it. The first haul sizzled and complained. The second made a sound that raised neck hair. The third found flame and taught it humility. Jonah climbed the stair to the belt loft, boots finding treads by memory his brain hadn't earned yet. He reached the tension pulley, saw at once how a bolt had been backed off to throw the strap at speed, and how the strap released would have kissed the wick and given the house to the west wind. He tightened with a small wrench he carried like a superstition and kicked the slat free. The little fire sulked and died where it sat. Down below, May worked the far wall with a soaked burlap and a curse a mother might forgive. Reeves appeared at the door, eyes wide, then narrowed as if he were measuring how much gratitude he could take credit for if he later remembered to own it. "Careful," he said, which was a poor tool to bring to a burning house. Mr. Carter hovered at his shoulder, discovering that notes are hard to take when your eyebrows are deciding whether to leave. Kincaid arrived at the pace of a man who refuses to let his lungs turn law. He sank onto a crate and coughed into a handkerchief and watched the town decide whether it would keep insisting on itself. When the last hiss died and the smoke became only smell, he stood and looked at Reeves. "You brought the bank to witness a sale," he said quietly. "Instead, he witnessed a rescue." Reeves spread his hands. "Accidents happen in old houses." May held up the slat with the charred wick tacked to its underside. "Accidents that know where wicks live aren't accidents." She pointed to the polished head of the bolt Jonah had reseated. "And bolts don't loosen themselves toward fire." Mr. Carter swallowed the kind of lie men drink when they're not thirsty, but the glass is pretty. He put his hat back on with the humility of a man reminded that hats are for sun, not for hiding. "I will report what I saw," he said. "I may omit my explanations." Reeves looked from face to face and found too few that would help him. He laughed softly, which is what men do when they have fewer friends than they counted on. "Proof," he said, and let the word sit as if it might perform in his place. "Blue water, a singed board, a tightened bolt. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a colorful afternoon. You have a problem," Jonah said pleasantly, "and not just with arithmetic." "Gentlemen," Kincaid said, and the word had enough weight in it to settle a hat or two, "we will meet at sundown at the church. The blue will be there in the basin, in case anyone's memory fades, and the board and the bolt will be there for touch, as well as sight. Mr. Carter, if you please, sit on the front pew and write in the margin, not the text." "Gladly," the agent said, looking relieved to be told where to aim his pen for once. The town cooled. People returned to their chores not because they thought chores would save them, but because chores keep your hands from murdering anxieties you cannot lawfully shoot. Mrs. Bell put bread on a board and did not call it a feast. Children were sent to nap with the promise of being awakened for the meeting, because denominations are made in rooms like that, and every child should hear the first Amen. May sat on the pump house step and let her pulse climb down one rung at a time. Noko brought her a cup of the not-quite-clean water, and she drank it because her body needed water more than her pride needed perfection. "You chose not to shout at him," Noko observed, meaning Reeves, "not even when the house burned." "Shouting is loud and shiny," May said. "Proof is patient and heavy." She leaned her head against the door jamb and closed her eyes. "Also, I'm saving my breath." "For what?" "For when the right person is listening." In the late afternoon, Jonah walked the relief slit with two boys, showing them with a stick how water likes to be invited rather than herded. They asked hard questions because they did not remember failing at this place yet. He loved them for it, in the unpracticed way that scares men who think love needs permission. Mr. Carter found Kincaid under the Mercantile's awning, hat in hand, like a man at a births and deaths window. "Sir," he began, and Kincaid saved him with a small motion. "All day I've wanted to send your kind away," Kincaid said. "Today I'm glad you came." He nodded toward the church. "If you are a fair witness tonight, your bank will be paid. Maybe not the way you planned," Carter considered. "The way I planned makes me unpopular at home," he admitted. "The way this looks makes my work feel like a thing worth doing." At sundown, the church filled, not with piety but with appetite for truth, for a plan, for a sentence to put in the mouth when men like Reeves arrived with papers. The blue sat in a basin under the pulpit like an argument that had bathed and put on its good shirt. The charred slat leaned against the lectern. The bolt and its washer sat on a plate. People touched all of it, one by one, because touch is how the suspicious grant parole to their eyes. Preacher Cole did a clever thing. He didn't preach. He called people by their names to say what they had seen. A boy said blue without his voice breaking. A woman described the smell of the belt house. A miner showed the nick on his thumb where he had grabbed a hot bucket handle without regretting it. Jonah used 4 words and a hand. Wrong bolt toward heat. Noko lifted the reed and let it whisper into the room until even Reeves's men closed their eyes to listen, embarrassed by how much they liked it. When it was May's turn, she did not rehearse. This place gave up after 30 days because someone told it 30 days was all it deserved, she said. "We've had 2 days, and water is already trying to remember us. Give me 2 more to stop the pump from lying and to turn the wheel without smoke. If we can make flour and ore move together before his auction." She tipped her head at the notice tacked to the back wall. "We can ask the bank to sell a living camp instead of a corpse. Living things fetch better and feed better." "They do," he said, surprising himself by sounding happy in church. "They also make better neighbors." Reeves rose as if pulled by strings attached to an invisible balcony. "Stirring," he said, "and brave. But if you fail, and my money sits with the odds here, remember that courage is not currency." Mrs. Bell stood. "It is when a town chooses to accept it," she said. "We'll cash it at my counter." Laughter rippled and grew into something that was not laughter, but might be used later when grief came back to collect. Kincaid got to his feet and stayed there until men who forgot they had hats on remembered and removed them. "I was a man who hired luck and fired people," he said. "I've been sick. I've been weak. I let Reeves do the work of my shame. Starting tonight, that changes. If the wheel turns by noon tomorrow without a fire, I sign an addendum to the camp charter. Water free to houses, 10% of bullion to common fund, 5% to school. If it doesn't turn..." He let the sentence hang like a bell with a tongue made of doubt. The room did the thing rooms do when they realize a man just put a spine back in his body in front of them. It held still, then drew breath together. Reeves smiled the way gamblers smile when they see a man bet the land under his house. "Bold," he murmured. "I hope your pen still works." "It will," Kincaid said. "I oiled it this morning." The room laughed, not because the joke was good, but because they needed the practice. They dismissed without benediction because the work was the only prayer worth saying tonight. May blew out the lamps and stood in the doorway an extra minute to let her eyes learn the night again. Reeves brushed past close enough to share air, and not a word. She watched him walk toward the Belt House with a man whose boots didn't match, and filed that away in the drawer where she kept useful resentments. Back at the pump house, she checked the mesh again, the bolts again, the way the handle felt in her palm again. Jonah locked the transit in its box and slid the box under a pew at the church because he trusted God's furniture more than Reeves's honesty. Noko cut another reed and left it on the step with a line of words in his language carved with a thumbnail. "Breathe, not beg." May lay down without undressing all the way you do when you want to tell the night you're not lulled by its politeness. She set the alarm on Mrs. Bell's clock, a stubborn little machine that would not be comforted no matter how hard you patted its back. Before sleep, she made a list in her head. The good kind, the kind you can do out of order. Tighten the intake flange, grease only the honest bearings. Set Mrs. Bell's starter by the stove again so morning has something worth swallowing. Find Reeves's bankman a front pew that doesn't squeak. The wind shifted. Somewhere across town a hinge creaked. Somewhere in her chest a hinge unstuck. The blue in the basin kept its modest radiance in the dark, as if to say, "I am not magic, I am dye. I am proof for people who finally remembered to want it." The last thing May heard before sleep, claimed the right she never signed away, was the reed's small breath in the cracked window. It sounded like a child practicing saying sorry and getting better at it each time. At dawn, when the alarm did what clocks do best and what hearts should, she was already up, hand on the pump handle, eyes on the wheel. Across town, Reeves woke too, with the expression of a man who has run out of easy accidents and will have to risk his good shoes. Dawn found the square already awake. Men stretched their backs the way barn doors swing open, slow, complaining, then useful. Children ran errands with the grave authority only children can summon. May had the pump house open, hair braided so tight it kept her thinking straight. Jonah checked the relief slit and tapped 2 stakes like a doctor checking a pulse. Noko whittled another reed, the shavings landing like thin moons on his boot. "Half turn first," May said, more to the wheel than to the crowd. "No load until the bearings stop resenting us." She set a hand on the brake and breathed out like a midwife. "Ease." Jonah gave the nod. Caleb, broad-shouldered, greased to the elbows, a man who'd always looked guilty because he'd earned it, took the lever. The belt crept, complained, and then, with a reluctant sigh, engaged. The mill wheel stuttered, found itself, and turned, a sober, church-going turn, not the brave gallop of profit, but the older rhythm of enough. The first 3 revolutions were a lesson in squeaks. Caleb tilted his head to each, like a man deciding which apology to accept. "That's dry," he said, "and that's proud, and that is someone's bad idea about lubrication." He twisted the oil cup off the bad one, sniffed, and swore under his breath. "Who in hell puts tallow in a hot journal?" "The same man who feeds oil to a well," May said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Reeves stood in the shade, smiling the way card sharps do when they've already memorized the deck and are bored by your shuffle. Caleb met May's eye. Something in his face chose a side it should have chosen a month ago. "I can fix this," he said, loud enough for the crowd and soft enough for his own shame. He fetched a can from under the workbench and brought it to May. "Spindle oil. Honest. I kept it hid so it wouldn't get reallocated." "Good," May said simply. "Show the boys where to put it and how little is enough." He did, hands careful, voice steadying as if forgiveness were a tool that fit in his grip. The squeak turned to a hum, indignant at first, then cooperative. The belt laid itself along the pulley like a horse remembering how to carry a saddle without arguing. "Load?" Jonah asked. May looked at the brake, at the wheel, at the faces. "A bucket's worth." She nodded to Mrs. Bell, who had been waiting with a scoop as if she'd been born expecting this minute, or went into the crusher in a shy clatter. The machine took it and made a sound like resolution, being ground into fine, obedient pieces. A murmur rose, the kind of sound towns forget they can make because it's quieter than blame. Men took their hats off without realizing it. Kincaid appeared at the top of the steps, like a man who had pretended to be late, so no one could accuse him of wanting to be first. He took one step down, then another, cane clicking time his lungs refused to. "Does it turn?" he asked. "No one and everyone." "It does," Jonah said, "without smoke." Kincaid's mouth did a thing it hadn't done in a season. It made room for joy without coughing first. "Then bring me paper," he said, and sat in the chair they'd set in the shade, as if his body had decided to trust the day. Reeves clapped, 2 slow, sarcastic claps, like a man applauding rain for being wet. "Pretty," he said. "I hope your pen looks as good as your wheel." "It does," Kincaid said. "And if it doesn't, I'll borrow the preacher's." "Mrs." Bell brought a little writing board and a bottle of ink like a communion set for secular sacraments. Kincaid uncapped the pen, and his hand trembled for the length of one breath and no more. "Addendum," he said to May. "Water to houses without fee, 10% bullion to common fund, 5% to school." He looked up at her. "And a line about the pump house door. Open when work is honest. Shut when liars need to be kept out." May smiled without showing teeth. "We can put that in the rules of the stove, too." He signed. It wasn't pretty handwriting. It was something better, legible. Preacher Cole signed as witness. Mrs. Bell signed as a woman who had stopped trusting men's pens and was relearning. Jonah signed where it made sense for a man who measures to certify. Caleb hovered, then put his name small in the margin under mechanic, as if the page might reject him if he came on too strong. It didn't. Paper can tell when a man is trying to become useful. The bell in the church rang once on its own, because wind can be theatrical when it likes the script. People laughed. Even Mr. Carter, the bank agent, smiled in a way that suggested his face was auditioning for a better job. "This will complicate the sale," he said to Reeves, with formal regret and private relief. "Living assets fetch more, living towns fetch still more." Reeves kept his smile. He had the kind that creased at the wrong time and made women reach for their aprons. "It will fetch exactly what the bank allows it to fetch," he said, "and I allow nothing until all liens are satisfied." He reached into his coat and brought out a paper that had been folded so many times the creases had learned their own addresses. "Notice of encumbrance." The pumps, the wheel and the belts stand as collateral against advances extended to Mr. Kincaid. If he changes the character of Mr. Carter blinked. We did not issue that. You signed it, Reeves said pleasantly, tapping a place where a rubber stamp had played dress-up as law. Carter took the paper and held it to the light. His eyebrows made a private decision. This is a copy, he said, and a clumsy one. He looked at Kincaid. Sir, I have seen your contracts. This clause exists in none of them. Then someone wrote a clause on a lie, May said, and tried to make us read it as if it were scripture. The crowd muttered in a new key, the one that turns into a fight if you let it. Kincaid lifted his hand, palm down, exactly the way a man gentles a horse. We won't tear paper, he said. We'll replace it. Mr. Carter, you will draft a memorandum acknowledging today's addendum and clarifying Lean's status. I'll sign it in front of people who say my name with their mouths full of bread, not oil. Carter bowed his head as if thanked for something heavy. Gladly. And I will wire Santa Fe to ask the territorial office to caution its stamps. He turned to Reeves. This document does not help you. It embarrasses us both. Reeves shrugged with the style of a man who never learned to blush. I bring all papers to daylight. Some burn, some don't. Speaking of daylight, Jonah said, eyes on the line of Cumulus building like a jury at the edge of town. We should get the spillway cleaned before the sky remembers it has other business. He looked at May. If we run off for 1 hour and show a glint in the sluice, even a banker will taste it. Run it, May said, but no heroics. If a bearing complains, we listen. Caleb tipped 2 fingers. I'll put my ear on everyone like it's telling a story. It was a good hour. The kind of hour you don't notice becoming memory until a year later when you're tired and you say, remember the day the wheel remembered? The crusher kept its manners. The stamps rose and fell like a machine praying. The first slurry came down the riffles and left behind a dust that glinted if you held your breath and gave the sun a fair chance. Mrs. Bell passed cups. Children counted stamp beats because counting is how you plant hope in a room without giving a speech. Noko sat with 2 old men who had been born before the county had a name and told them a joke so small it fit in their shirts like a secret and warmed their ribs. Kincaid signed a second copy of the addendum because paper likes redundancy better than romance. The sky considered theatrics and decided to wait. Reeves sulked in the shade of his own certainty and tried on new angles for his smile. Mr. Carter drafted quickly and folded carefully and pressed the paper smooth with the side of his hand, the way men do when they want words to behave. At 40 minutes, Caleb whistled twice, a warning note that made May put her hand on the brake without thinking. Journal 2 is warm, he said, not screaming, asking. Answer, May said. He oiled the cup, not too much, and tightened the collar. The sound dropped half a shade. Better, he breathed. At 50 minutes, the riffles caught a flake big enough that no one had to pretend. It lay among the black sand like a full stop at the end of a sentence women had waited a month to finish. A girl saw it first and pointed with a gasp that sounded like the first time you say a man's name and mean it. Gold! No one cheered. The town had learned in 2 days to save its throat for when it mattered. They smiled the way you smile at babies, quietly, so the future doesn't scare. Kincaid closed his eyes, opened them, and nodded once to himself. Write the school into the minutes, he said to Carter, who did. That was when the whistle came from the ridge, a thin, mean note that had learned its manners in coal yards. Men turned. Women drew children close by reflex, then loosened their hands, because fear is also a habit. A rider appeared, then 2, then 5, company men in dusters the exact wrong color for the day. The foreman with the scar took the front and held up a palm that said, "Let's talk," and a mouth that said, "I've already decided." "Afternoon," he called. "Inspector from the territory wants a look at your wheel, claims it's unsafe, says he has jurisdiction over anything that can throw a man." "Inspector?" May asked. "From where?" The foreman smiled. "From my experience." He reached into his coat and pulled a badge that had done better work in other years. Interim deputy, on account of the marshal being busy at the railhead. I've got a paper says this wheel is condemned until a proper agent says otherwise. Another paper, Mrs. Bell groaned. I swear ink breeds in his pockets. Kincaid stood as if summoned to a duel he couldn't avoid, and wouldn't. Sir, he said evenly, if you close this wheel, you close the only proof we have that this camp is not a corpse. What law do you serve? The kind that keeps people from getting dead, the foreman said, and glanced at the stamp battery as if it had insulted his mother. Shut her down. May lifted her hand. The wheel slowed. Men who don't know how machines think call that obedience. Men who do know call it respect. We can argue the paper, she said. We won't argue a man's leg. She looked at the foreman. Where's your inspector? He pointed at himself with a little ugly bow. Right here. You inspected this place at midnight when you tried to burn it, Jonah said. His voice was not loud, it was precise. You set a wick under a slat. You loosened a bolt toward heat. The foreman's scar twitched. You got proof of that besides your feelings? Charred slat, nicked bolt, witness. Come to church. We keep our proof in pews. He chuckled as if told a joke by a man who had lost money. I keep mine on saddles. He lifted a hand. 2 riders moved toward the pump house. Don't, May said, and didn't know until the word left her that she was ready to put her body between them and the handle. She didn't have to. Caleb stepped instead, greased dark hand on the doorframe, shoulders saying, You will have to take me apart in front of my neighbors before you touch this hinge. The foreman weighed the room and found it not on his side. Fine, he said. We'll return with a seal a judge likes the look of. He tipped his hat to Kincaid with disrespect, masquerading as manners. Until then, I recommend your men go home. Wheels can't hurt you if they ain't moving. Rumors can, Noko said gently. The foreman turned his horse. That's my job, he said, and rode off with his men, Dust deciding not to follow them because it preferred better company. Mr. Carter let out a breath he had apparently been saving since he graduated a school for polite thieves. I'll stay, he said to Kincaid. If I leave, they'll say I ran. Good, Kincaid said. He looked older by a year and better by 3. We won't run. We'll watch. We'll write. We'll not let men with borrowed badges decide whether our wheel is a god. They idled the mill. The wheel cooled. The belts relaxed with a relieved huff. Caleb checked each journal and wrote numbers in chalk on the housings, as if the machine were a boy taking a spelling test and wanted to pass. The first drop of rain hit the dust with an argument. May tilted her face. The sky had finally accepted its assignment. We need to see that vent cut, Jonah said. If water comes hard, it'll try to use the old drift as a throat. If the vent's blocked, she'll choke. May nodded. Bring lanterns, short fuses, and a rope for stubbornness. Diddy, they reached the vent at the edge of town as the first sheet fell. Clean, cold, the kind that throws smell back into the ground so you remember what it used to be called. The vent's mouth was a ring of stacked stone and a wooden lid that fit badly, because men had lost the habit of caring where the lids fit. Caleb swung it aside, and the hole breathed on them, cool, damp, sullen. Noko lay on his belly and listened. He lifted his head, eyes unhappy. Someone stuffed her with rags, he said. And something heavier. Who? Mrs. Bell asked. The kind of man who thinks you can stop a song by breaking the flute, he said. Jonah tied a rope around his waist and slid into his shoulders. He reached, cursed softly, and pulled a wad of oil-soaked cloth free. Another. Whoever did this was careful, he said. Careful is worse than stupid. They hauled until the rope creaked, and May made a rule about not harrowing yourself into a narrow, unlit grave. When the last bundle came free, the vent sighed properly, the way a chest does when you loosen a corset laced by someone who hated you. Better, Noko said. It would have been a good place to end the day. On a sigh, under rain, with proof on the ground and a town learning the shape of itself. But men who need a fight will call one back, even after you let it go. From the far end of the ridge, a muffled thump shouldered the rain aside. The ground under May's palm said, "Uh-oh," the way a dog says it with its hackles. "Blast," Jonah said, and the word fell into the hole and came back sour. "At the old cut. The one above the relief slit," May said. She didn't wait for permission, she ran. So did everyone who understood the math that turns a small bad idea uphill into a big bad fact down. They crested the rise as a second, fainter boom murmured in their teeth. Smoke fingered out of the cut like a liar testing the door. Reeves stood under an umbrella he hadn't earned and watched with an expression that told the rain it had turned up early for the funeral. May didn't stop. "Sandbags!" she shouted, though they had none. "Burlap! Anything that bulks. We choke the chute before the water learns a new line." "In the Mercantile," Mrs. Bell answered, already sprinting. Caleb tore boards with his bare hands. Jonah measured angles with his eyes and pointed where hands could become math. Noko cut a new reed and stuck it in the wet ground and listened. "She's angry," he said softly. "We must be smarter than angry." The rain increased, as if persuaded by the narrative. The first sheet of muddied water shouldered toward the slit, looking for any excuse to be stupid. May planted her feet, caught a sack from Mrs. Bell, and set it where the flow would learn to prefer the channel they'd cut. Caleb slammed a board. Jonah braced a buttress with a pick handle and a prayer. Over the rain, over the rush, came the thin, triumphant note of a whistle, the kind men use when they think they've outfoxed you. Reeves didn't blow it. He only enjoyed it. "Arithmetic," he called. "1 plus rain plus gravity, subtract hope." May didn't answer. Some men are a job, and some are a waste of a sentence. She lifted another sack, and another, and in the doorway of a day that should have been happy, she built a new door and held it while the town learned to push with her. The water hit the wall and sulked, and then, because gravity can be persuaded when you speak its language, took the slit and ran where they'd asked it to. The vent breathed. The wheel, idled but primed, watched like a dog who trusts the door to open again. Kincaid soaked through, laughed once without coughing. "Hold," Jonah said, and they held. "Hold," May said, and they did. The blast's mischief spent itself on the sack wall and went to look for someone else's mistake to play in. Reeves snapped his umbrella closed and looked disappointed in the weather. "Fine," he said, almost to himself. "Next time we bring a judge." "Bring a mirror," Mrs. Bell called back, hair pasted to her face, eyes bright with the indecency of victory. The rain softened, became water again instead of theatre. People sagged and then straightened because sagging is for after. May leaned on the sack wall and felt the ground under her boots say, "Still yours, if you keep asking correctly." A boy came skidding with a telegram slip held high like a bird he'd saved. "For Mr. Kincaid," he shouted, "from Santa Fe." Kincaid took it with fingers that had learned to be brave twice today. He read, and his mouth twitched into something like a grin that had been stored too long. "Well?" Jonah asked, because some news deserves to be generous. "Judge replies," Kincaid said, raising his voice so even the rain could hear. "No injunction. Proceed with work. Territorial inspector to be scheduled by the town." He looked at Reeves. "Arithmetic just learned a new number." Reeves's smile finally left his face, as if it had been evicted. "Enjoy your hour," he said. "I'm not done counting." "Neither are we," May said, and the water around her boots agreed. They walked back to the square in a wet parade that felt like a rehearsal for being a place again. The wheel waited. The pump handle gleamed. The addendum dried in the preacher's vestibule like a promise pinned to a laundry line. May squeezed water from her braid and looked at the sky, which was suddenly shy about being dramatic. "Tomorrow," she told the square, "we run without stopping for 2 hours and pour our first bar. Then we take a picture of it we can nail to the bank door." Caleb nodded. "I'll sleep on the floor by Journal too." "Sleep in a bed," May said. "Guilt makes a poor pillow. Bring your ears in the morning." That night, As lanterns went out one and then one and then one, a final rumble walked the ridge and thought better of it. The town lay on its back and listened to the reed in the window and believed a ridiculous thing on purpose. That mischief could be outworked, that paper could be overwritten, that people could be taught to like the sound of their own town breathing. And under all that, at the very bottom of the shaft where men's courage leaves coins to keep them company, something moved. A slither of intent in the dark that said, "One more try." The rain washed the night down to something you could lift. At first light, lanterns winked awake one after another. The square answered with the good clatter of tools. May had flour on her cuffs and grit in her voice. 2 hours clean, she told the crew. No bravado, no miracles, just enough. Jonah checked the relief slit and ran a last sight to the sump, like a man making sure his own pulse was where he left it. Noko set a reed by the vent and another near the spillway. Both breathed slow, pleased, like a house after windows are opened. Caleb went from journal to journal, palm on the housings, ear almost to the iron. He'd slept, but the kind of sleep that keeps its boots on. Mrs. Bell brought coffee so black it could preach. Kincaid arrived with a blanket over his shoulders and a pen already uncapped. Mr. Carter had 3 pages of neat lines and a face that looked like it was ready to enjoy being scolded by facts again. Reeves came late, umbrella under arm, although the sky had remembered how to be polite. He counted heads and wrote none of them down. "Carry on," he said, in the tone men use when they intend to interrupt later. They brought the belt up, and the wheel answered without sulk. The stamps lifted and fell. The first slurry took the riffles, with the satisfied sound of a task that had finally been given back the right tool. May stood with her hand on the brake and let her breath pace the pistons. "Easy," she told the mill. "We're staying." By mid-morning, the first pan showed color you didn't have to squint for. A flake showed itself, then a cousin. The riffle boards learned to keep what mattered and release what didn't without anyone shouting. "Mr." Carter wrote assay later and underlined it twice, then crossed out the second underline to show restraint. In the crucible shed, an honest shed with nothing fancy to hide, the furnace wore a small, contained smile. Caleb eased the draft until flame took the right shape. A steady, working blue with a collar of yellow that meant everything was eating what it should. He salted the mix, stirred carefully, and minded the slag as if it had a personality he didn't trust. "Show me your hands," May said. He held them up, not shaking. "I'll do it clean," he promised. "No tricks. If Reeves wants a story, he can borrow one from the weather." The town gathered at the door, the way people gather at the edge of a good book. Even the children were quiet. Even the dogs managed to look employed. Kincaid leaned on the post, eyes bright with the indecent hope of a man who thought he had finished with hope's foolishness, and discovered it was the only arithmetic that had ever warmed him. "Pour," May said. Caleb tipped the crucible. The gold ran like heavy honey, thicker, slower, properly reluctant. It filled the mold with a sound that could make a banker close his eyes and pretend to be a boy again. A breath went through the crowd like wind under a door. "Don't talk to it, Mrs." Bell warned the room as if the bar could spook. "Let it mind its cooling." Jonah timed the pour and the draw, wrote the numbers, then wrote a little sentence for himself where no one could read it. "We did not lie to ourselves today." Noko stood at the threshold and listened to the reeds sing under the steam, smiling like a man meeting a grandchild for the first time in a language older than both of them. Reeves yawned. It was an amateur's insult, and it earned him nothing except the memory of the way 100 faces didn't look at him. A shadow moved at the shed's back window. Caleb stiffened. "Door," he said softly. May turned in time to see a gloved hand touch the sill and test it careful, practiced. She crossed the floor in 3 steps and set the iron latch with a click that sounded like a promise and a warning. She didn't raise her voice. She did not have to. Whoever owned the hand put his breath back in his throat and withdrew, as if the day had misjudged him, and he'd let it. "Eyes open," Jonah said. "They failed at water. They'll try paper. Failing that, brass. Or smoke." Mrs. Bell added. Men who fear barlight like shadows better. When the bar skinned, Caleb lifted it with tongs and set it on the scale. The needle made up its mind with admirable speed. Carter leaned in, then looked at Kincaid, as if permission were a muscle he was training. Enough to pay 3 months' back wages if silver prices hold, he said. More if we refuse to cheat. We refuse, May said. We've had enough cheating. Reeves clapped once, a slow peal. Charming, he said. Now, about custody. Until the bank adjudicates liens, all bullion remains in the sanctuary. Preacher Cole interrupted from the doorway, voice polite as a rope. We weighed it there before. We will weigh it there again. If God objects, he can send a telegram. Laughter, honest and relieved. Carter nodded. Sanctuary suits me, he said. Ink behaves better in rooms with windows colored on purpose. They formed a procession that no one had rehearsed but everyone knew. Mrs. Bell with the ledger, Jonah with the weights, Caleb with the bar, May first through the door because she had started the day that way and meant to finish it. Kincaid at her shoulder like a man remembering he could still vouch. Reeves walked behind them with his pen like a dagger writing the air. In the church, light from the cheap glass made the bar look briefly like a sacrament. The town filed in as if they had brought hunger and might leave with something else. Carter read the weight aloud. Preacher Cole recorded it as if truth had a temple job. Kincaid signed the addendum again, with the new number slid into the margin. May put her finger on the line that said water was free and kept it there for the length of a breath. That was when the stranger arrived with a badge that had learned to travel and a paper that had learned to puff itself. He was tidy. Hair parted the way rules like, and he wore the expression men wear when they would like to be fair if only fairness would stop complaining. Deputy Marshal Owen Fitch, he announced, showing badge and warrant in the same practiced motion. On behalf of the Territorial Court, I'm instructed to take temporary custody of all bullion, pending investigation into irregularities alleged by Mr. Reeves and other concerned parties. Reeves didn't bother to look surprised. Paper, he said softly, like a man saying hello to an old flame. Carter moved before anyone else could be foolish. Marshal Fitch, he said, the bank is present and currently in lawful custody of the bar as against bank claims. We have signed addenda, witnessed, recorded. There is no injunction. There is, however, a town. It will not be improved by your badge if your badge behaves like a shovel at a baptism. Fitch considered. He wasn't a fool. He also wasn't immune to paperwork. I'm also instructed to ensure public safety, he said. There have been reports of blasts. We cut the vent clean, Jonah said. The only explosions today were on paper. May stepped forward. She didn't like men with orders, because orders make decent men worse at listening. Marshal, she said, if you carry this bar across that threshold against the will of the town, you will make a riot. Not because we crave the metal, but because we crave not being lied to again. Sit, read. We will show you the blue water and the wick and the bolt. If you still want to carry it after, I will walk beside you and keep the crowd from practicing democracy with your hat. It should not have worked. But authority responds to sentences delivered like that. Clean, respectful, with the hint that foolishness will be expensive. Fitch sat. Preacher Cole brought him the proof, like communion. Carter hovered ready to translate between languages that did not like each other. While they argued by degrees instead of volume, Noko stood by the window and listened to the read. He frowned once and stepped out, quiet as a thought. At the church corner, he found a small heap of gravel out of place, a scuff in the dust that did not belong to anyone he respected, and a spark cap discarded like a child's promise. He touched each thing with the tip of his knife, then straightened and looked down the alley where a man with a scar was learning the limits of patience. Inside, the marshal read and reread until the page became a room and he could see where to stand in it. He nodded at the blue and at the bolt and at the slat. He looked at the bar, which waited modestly, and then at Kincaid, who did not flinch. My warrant doesn't fit as well as I thought it would, he admitted. with the courage decent men find just before it's too late to save face. I will report that custody is best left here, under watch, until the judge can be made to hear the facts in order rather. Reeves opened his mouth with a new complaint. May closed it with a look. Kincaid extended a hand to the marshal. "You're welcome to sleep in the vestry and wake up as a witness," he said. "It pays in bread and some other currencies we've recently reminted." Fitch shook because refusing that hand would have made his badge feel theatrical instead of useful. "I will," he said, "and I'll sign the ledger as present." "Good," Mrs. Bell said. "I do love a guest who signs his own plate." People smiled in the soft, scandalized way church sanctuaries make them. It might have settled right there into a day you could put on a shelf and take down when winter came mean. But the town had been promised one more try by mischief, and mischief keeps its promises. A sound cracked the air, sharp, clipped, too polite for dynamite and too rude for a door. Glass shattered in the crucible shed across the square. The room flinched. May didn't. "Stay," she told the marshal, because someone had to give him a chance to be wise. She ran, Jonah behind her, Caleb outrunning his guilt, Noko already in the alley because his ears kept him 5 breaths ahead of everyone. They found the shed's side window flowered into shards and a lantern guttering on the floor where it had been knocked. The crucible lay on its side, slag half-cooled into a snarl. Footprints, a careful man's, heels shaved to throw off trackers, led to the fence and vanished where someone had dragged a wet burlap to scrub them of their intentions. "Shot," Jonah said, running a finger over the window frame. Powder freckles stippled the wood. "Too small for a charge, meant to scare, not burn." "Or to break the habit of pouring," Caleb said, ashamed despite having built the morning clean. He picked up the crucible, turned it in his hands, and checked the lip. "Hairline," he said. "It'll live, like everything else around here when we ask it nicely." Noko stooped and lifted something from the shadows with his knife tip. A strip of leather, cut fresh, with a notch from a spur rowel and a smear of oil that told the truth to a nose that cared. He held it up to the light, then tucked it into his shirt. "Proof. Likes to ride back to camp on the man who made it," he said. "We'll return it when the room is full and he has nowhere to sit." May righted the lamp and trimmed the wick. "We pour the second bar at dusk," she said, as if the interruption had been a ceremony no one had asked for. "Not because we need a second, because paper prefers a pair." "Dusks for sermons," Reeves said from the doorway, pretending he had not been the one to yell and send the shot and tidy his conscience afterward. "People don't see straight by candle." "Then stand close," May said, "or bring better eyes." They did pour at dusk, with the marshal in the doorway and Mr. Carter holding the ledger like a shield, and Kincaid leaning like a man trying to convince his body to be present for a promise. The second bar was smaller, because the day had spent itself on more than metal. It was also lovelier, because stubbornness had found a shape. They walked it again to the church, not with the pageantry of noon, but with the private sincerity of a family after supper. The glass coloured the room purple and red. Children leaned against their mothers and learned, later, to call the memory warm. Preacher Cole set both bars side by side and said a thing even atheists can use. "We don't bless metal, we bless the hands that insisted on it." "Fine words," Reeves drawled, "but at sunup the law comes with its own hands. I wired Santa Fe. I wired the rail. I wired anyone who will pretend to outrank your little festival." He smiled like a hinge with no oil. "Sleep, and see how paper prays." May didn't look at him. She looked at the bars, then at the pump-house door, then at the mill, then at the town, the 1,000 small decisions that make a place breathy instead of broken. "We'll meet paper with people," she said, "and with a ledger that refuses to be embarrassed." "Speaking of embarrassment," Mrs. Bell said, "who's minding our guest?" She meant the bar and the marshal, and the man with the scar, who had learned to whistle at the wrong moments. "I will," Carter said, surprising himself again. "I've sat up with worse company, and if the judge asks, I'll tell him what a night smells like when a town earns its metal." They banked the furnace. They locked the shed with a new iron bar Jonah swore wasn't symbolic. They set a cot in the vestry for Fitch, and a chair for Carter, and a place by the window for Noko, because windows like to have someone they can trust listening to them. The square emptied in that reluctant, happy way work-through days do. May stood alone a minute longer and touched the pump handle like a shoulder. Tomorrow, she told herself, told the story that had developed a taste for new chapters. Tomorrow, we teach a judge to read. Behind her, in the near dark, a match flared and went out because the fingers that held it remembered, too late. That flame tells on itself. A silhouette detached from the alley and merged with the night like a promise that had forgotten it was supposed to be kept. On the church door, the notice of auction hung limp in the damp, ink bleeding like a bruise that had decided to heal. And far off, on the ridge, a lantern swung twice, the signal of men who planned to arrive before dawn with papers and a seal, hoping to find a town asleep and a door obliging. The lantern swung a third time, as if the hand that held it had developed a tremor. "Let him shake," May whispered, and went to sleep in her boots. May woke at the sound of boots trying to be polite. The reed in the window sang one high, steady note. In its thin voice, she heard a warning. Pressure, not panic. She pulled her boots on, grabbed the lamp, and stepped into a street that hadn't yet made up its mind to be day. Lanterns bobbed down the ridge like cautious stars. Reeves came first, of course, umbrella under his arm, smile already sharpened. Beside him rode a man in a long coat with a leather tube slung from his shoulder and a seal case strapped to his saddle. 3 more followed, the foreman with the scar among them, jaw working as if chewing on a grievance he couldn't swallow. Marshal Fitch met them at the edge of the square, badge visible, notebook out. Mr. Carter stood behind him, hat but no umbrella, papers in order because he had slept near the ledger and considered that close enough to prayer. Kincaid appeared a breath later, breathless, blanket around his shoulders, cane tapping irritation into the dirt. Reeves raised his chin. "Gentlemen and Mrs. Bell," he added with a nod he hoped would pass for charm, "allow me to present Mr. Landry, Deputy Clerk of the Territorial Court, bearing writs and seals, duly impressed. We will be brief. We are here to close unsafe apparatus and to take custody of suspect bullion before more superstition is smelted into claims." Landry dismounted with the tenderness of a man who minded his knees. He had the look of a clerk who had learned to travel, a politeness that turned into stiffness when he was tired. He unbuckled the case and produced 3 papers with ribbons that tried too hard. "Writ of replevin," he read, tapping the first. "Order to secure chattels, i.e. stamped bullion, pending adjudication, closure order on the mill for inspection, and a cautionary note to the recorder regarding last-minute filings." "Recorder answered yesterday," Carter said, calm as pencil. "Map recorded, addendum signed, custody established. There is no injunction per Santa Fe." He lifted the telegram and let Landry read the judge's words as the sun found them. Fitch took a half-step forward, "And as of last night, on my discretion, the bars remain under watch in sanctuary." He looked at the deputy clerk. "You want to look, we let you look. You want to carry, you convince the room in daylight. We do not drag the town out of its bed to watch a seal act like a thief." Reeves tried to laugh and found his mouth full of grit. "Oh, the poetry," he murmured. "Mr. Laney, any verses to add?" May lifted her lamp and blew it out because she preferred disagreement in clean light. "Just this. If the orders are honest, read them at the church door at sunup with the doors open and the reed singing." She glanced at the foreman's boots, and then at the alley where Noko had found the leather strip. "And leave your spurs at the threshold. They've been busy at our vents." A rustle went through the crowd. The foreman's scar twitched toward a smile that never made it to his eyes. "Lady," he said, "I don't know what a reed told you, but—" Noko stepped forward, small strip of leather on his palm, like a receipt. "You dropped this where songs go," he said softly. "It remembers your spur." He turned the strip. The rowel notch gleamed, a smear of oil unmistakable to men who spend their lives with honest grease, caught the dawn. "We'll keep the proof polite until a judge asks it to speak." Fitch took the strip without theatre. He slid it into his notebook and clicked the elastic closed. "Names?" he asked. The foreman smirked. Fitch's jaw moved once. "Fine," he said. "You'll give them under oath this afternoon." He turned to Landry. "Read your papers in the open. Then we'll see what fits and what's been tailored by a man with bad scissors." They stood on the church steps while the sky chose a colour. Landry read each writ out loud, voice careful, vowels from a different county. The words did their best to sound like inevitability. Carter answered each clause with a clause the town had earned. Kincaid, pale but standing, said yes, where yes would not hurt, and no when no finally felt like a muscle he could use. "Closure pending inspection," Landry finished. "Marshal." Fitch looked at the wheel, at the belts, at the journals chalked with numbers Caleb had written like a man trying to leave a trail back to his better self. "We can inspect in an hour, in daylight, with the mill moving slow and with the relief slit gapped. If it throws so much as a whisper toward harm, I shut it, and I sign your closure with my own hand. If it doesn't, we will accept pending as meaning pending on reason, not on Reeves." Reeves bowed a fraction. "I adore conditional verbs," he said. "Very theological." "Very practical," May said. "While we wait, I'll put coffee where evidence can find it." Mrs. Bell had it ready in a heartbeat because women like her see hours ahead and lay plates for them. Townsfolk gathered not like a mob, but like a quilt. Scraps, hands, stories, heat. Landry looked at them, and the hard thing in his face softened by one small degree. He looked at Reeves, and some part of him decided to stop being recruited. Inspection hour began with Jonah walking Landry and Fitch through the headworks, hand on iron, not on rhetoric. "Relief slit cuts pressure here," he said. "Vent is clear, unless men with spare leather strips go walking in their sleep." He showed the chalk marks, the bearing caps numbered, the oil cups clean. He did not hide the hairline crack in the crucible lip. He showed where Caleb had dressed it and where they were saving for a new one. "No theatre," he added. "Metal doesn't like it." Caleb rotated journals by feel, his hands confident and chastened. He spoke to each cup as if apologizing for weeks of bad manners. "Honest oil," he said to Fitch, letting him smell the difference. "No tallow tricks." Fitch nodded. "Bring it up," he said. Quarter speed. The belt engaged, patient. The wheel rolled its shoulder like a horse after a winter. The stamps lifted and came down with a dignity that soothed men who thought they'd forgotten how to trust sequences. Landry watched the moving iron as a man watches an unfamiliar animal that has chosen, for now, not to bite. "Safe enough for a courthouse," Fitch said at last. He turned to Landry. "Clark?" Landry put a finger on his seal case and did not open it. "The closure order is satisfied by inspection," he said, surprising himself with the taste of those words. "As for Replevin, the bank's custody on the bars stands. No one describes this church as a den of thieves. And the caution to the recorder is withdrawn. Papers of yesterday were in order." Reeves's smile went thin and white. "You came a long way to say never mind, Mr. Landry," he said. "I came a long way to learn whose words I trusted," Landry replied, not loud, and locked his case. The square breathed. Joy did not erupt. It seldom does in places that have learned to ration it, but men straightened, and women let their shoulders drop, and children looked at the wheel like a friendly animal instead of a trick. Kincaid's eyes shone, as if someone had opened a window in him. They were almost through the morning when the telegraph stopped. The key on the counter in the little office failed to chatter. The wire went slack with the exact indifference of a man who has decided to leave before you finished your sentence. Carter frowned. "I had a second wire for Santa Fe," he said. "There should be a reply by now." Jonah went to the pole. "Cut," he said after a minute, holding up the ends like a man showing a snake he had been given when he asked for rope. The cut was high, spurs and spike high. They brought climbers, he added, and looked toward the ridge where the foreman's men were becoming a habit. Splice, May asked. I can make it talk to itself again, Jonah said, but it won't reach Santa Fe until someone rides the gap. Send 2 boys, Mrs. Bell said. Give them bread and a copper each for courage. Better, May said. Send 1 boy and 1 man who knows which bushes lie about shade. She looked at Noko. He nodded and was already looping a coil of wire onto his saddle. Back by dusk, he promised, with an answer that smells like a real office. He swung up. The little horse took the hill like a letter with its stamp already paid. By noon, Landry had finished his inventory of bad rumors and found them wanting. He wrote in a neat hand that made you feel safe even if you didn't know why. He signed, and Fitch signed, and Carter countersigned with a grin that managed to be simultaneously respectable and wicked. Reeves pretended to nap under his umbrella and counted the number of times the Reed's song made people smile. He did not like the math. May allowed herself a plate of beans on the pump-house step. Jonah sat beside her, elbows on knees. When this is done, he said, you going to leave? She considered. The town stretched in front of them. Plank, dust, honest noise. People trying not to be the versions of themselves that had been easy. I thought this would be a month of work, she said. Feels like a life. Good, he said, and didn't try to make it about a promise she wasn't ready to make. He pointed at the Camp 1 month only board propped against the wall. We should turn it over and use the blank side. Paint a new rule. What's it say? Home, he said, then took the word back into his mouth, shy suddenly, as if he'd said her name by mistake. Or something less obvious. She laughed, and the Reed seemed to enjoy the sound. The foreman with the scar appeared again, alone this time, no riders, no paper, just stubbornness. He stopped 3 paces short of the pump-house and tipped his hat as if approaching a grave he didn't mean to respect. Congratulations, he said. You bought yourself a week. We bought ourselves a town, May said. He shrugged. Same thing for a while. His eyes found Caleb. You sleeping easier, mechanic. Caleb didn't look up from the journal housing he was cleaning. Easier is for men who don't remember other men, he said. I'll take cleaner. The foreman made a small face at that. Distaste, contempt, maybe hunger. Tell your boss we'll see him in Santa Fe or in hell, whichever Clark answers first. He touched his spur to his horse and went, the little strip of missing leather on his left boot like a confession he didn't know he was wearing. At dusk, Noko returned with dust on his braids and wire marks on his palms and a telegram in his teeth. He swung down and handed it to Carter, who read it aloud because the square had earned news. Santa Fe acknowledges, he declared. No seizure, no closure. Formal inspector to be dispatched in 3 days. Under-town escort, and, he smiled, astonished at the audacity of ink on their side. The judge says, and I quote, if the church ledger is honest, let the bars sleep under hymnals. Laughter long and low. Preacher Cole looked like a man who had been asked to keep a pile of gold safe with nothing but psalms, and was delighted to discover he had always wanted the job. They lit lamps. People sat on steps and upturned buckets, and each other's patience. Mr. Landry, who had arrived with a full case, closed it with the contentment of a man who had finally spent something worth spending. He offered his hand to May. I'll write clean, he promised. And if I'm asked why, I'll say I saw a woman do arithmetic with water and found it more persuasive than Latin. She shook his hand. Bring better paper next time, she said, the kind that doesn't leak when it rains. He laughed and mounted, and was gone into a night that had decided to keep an eye on him. Kincaid coughed once, and then didn't. Tomorrow, he said to May, and the town and the bar asleep under hymnals, we call the roll of men who want to come back to work for wages, not scrip. And we put a chalkboard in the square that says what the week owes and what the week paid. Put it on the back of the 1 month sign, Jonah said. Wood remembers. It'll hold better if the other side learned a lesson first. May nodded. Do it at dawn. She turned toward the mercantile, toward Mrs. Bell already sweeping the day out of her doorway, and toward the Belt House to check the latch one last time. Habit saved more towns than bravery, and she trusted the quiet guardian more than the noisy one. She reached the shed and touched the bar. It held. The window, freshly boarded, minded its manners. She exhaled. A click snapped behind her. Not a gun, a match. She turned. In the alley, the foreman stood with a fuse in his left hand and a new strip of leather on his spur. He smiled like a man who knows one trick and is determined to perform it until it kills him. "Evening," he said, and touched flame to cord. May didn't shout. She ran. The fuse hissed, arrogant, sure it could cross the alley faster than a woman with tired legs and a town's worth of obligations. She reached with the small knife she used for bread, slid steel under burning gut and lifted, just enough for Jonah's hand to find the cord and pinch. Sparks spat and died like guilty ideas. The foreman blinked. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like he might be tired of himself. "Bring your judge," May said, knife steady, breath loud. "Bring your paper, bring a better trick." Fitch appeared at her shoulder with cuffs that had been polite too long. "Or," he said, voice dry as rawhide, "bring your wrists." The foreman glanced at Reeves's dark shape at the end of the alley, waiting to see whether loyalty would still pay. He looked at the little church where bars slept under hymnals, and men who had stopped believing had learned for a day to hum again. He looked at May's knife and Jonah's hands, and the reed on the sill, singing its irreverent, patient note. He tugged his sleeves as if to straighten a memory, and held out his hands. Fitch closed the metal with a sound the alley liked. The town did not cheer. It exhaled, grief out, air in, because that is how you keep from turning justice into theatre. May leaned against the shed and finally let herself laugh, short and fierce and unladylike. "Tomorrow," she said to anyone who needed an order for sleep, "we make a payroll line that counts in coin, not in months." Across the square, Mrs. Bell flipped the closed sign in her window, not to open, but to empty wood. The blank side waited like a page, smug with possibility. The reed sang. The wheel at rest seemed to listen. And somewhere on the ridge, a man who had run out of papers and lantern tricks sat down and tried to imagine a world where arithmetic did not know his last name. They strung a rope from the courthouse to the pump house and called it a payroll line, because names stand up straighter when there's a place for them to stand. Mrs. Bell flipped the old red board, scrubbed it clean, and chalked in sober block, "Wages due, wages paid." Below, dates. Below the dates, blank space with a temper. Kincaid made the first deposit, coin from a tin he did not let Reeves touch. "It isn't all," he said, voice raw with the honest kind of embarrassment. "It is the start." He set the tin down, like a man putting his name where a lie used to be. Coins struck palm. Names were called. A boy brought a stool so Mrs. Bell wouldn't have to crane. She sat like a queen in a mercantile throne and counted with a cashier's snap that made paper nervous. Caleb took his pay and did not smile. He looked at the coins and said, "These are heavier than the ones I owed." Jonah asked for an hour of his count to be swapped for string and nails. "We're not done with the slit," he said. Marshal Fitch signed the margin each time a debt older than the week got cut in half. Mr. Carter initialed too, as if putting bank letters next to the town's handwriting taught ink to be decent. Landry watched with the expression a tired clerk wears when a window finally opens. Reeves hovered. He did not take a place in any line. When a woman asked whether scrip could be traded for flour, he said no, loud enough to be remembered, and then, finding no applause, tried later. Later didn't sell. Mrs. Bell said, "You may buy flour with flour," and the woman grinned and offered a loaf. Reeves said nothing else. By noon, the board had a column of amounts that looked like work learning to trust ink again. Children brought water. The wheel turned without asking for applause. The square sounded like a barn at evening, busy, decent. "Announce the school," Jonah murmured. May lifted her chin. "Beginning next Sunday, 3 hours after service, we hold class in the assay office," she said. Maps, figures, and the kind of reading that helps you keep what you earn. 10 seats at a time, any age. Pay is curiosity. We'll buy slates out of the 5%. Put my name on the list, Caleb said, scratching his ear the way men do when they volunteer for something their fathers never saw. Noko tapped the board where Blank waited. Write a small rule, he said. Shorter than wrong men's laws, longer than a threat. May printed, water isn't for sale. Neighbors aren't either. She didn't put her name under it. The town didn't need an author. It needed a habit. Afternoon bent toward decent. Fitch walked the wheel and, finding nothing but numbers behaving, walked the street instead, learning faces. Carter stapled a telegram on the church door. See you in 30 days for a hearing. Until then, leave the gold where the hymns can watch it. The foreman's hearing came sooner. He stood before the bench with his wrists quiet. Landry read the charge: malicious endangerment and attempted arson. Fitch recited the alley and the fuse. The strip of leather went into evidence. Even Reeves flinched when he saw the notch he'd ordered filed down a month ago. Bail went high. The cell door shut on the sound of a man who had run out of tricks. At dusk, Kincaid called for quiet. I can leave this town by deed, he said, or live in it by work. I'm tired of the first kind of sentence. He looked at May, then Jonah, then the board. From this hour, Reeves is relieved. The mill answers to a committee of 5 named here, with Miss Delaney holding the deciding vote if fools split evenly. I'll spend what I owe until the books are honest. Reeves laughed, but no one joined it. He looked smaller because men do when their echo is taken. You'll ruin the camp with kindness, he said. Then we'll ruin it into a place, Mrs. Bell answered. He left before anyone had to watch him choose between staying and apologizing. Men who've always commanded prefer dust to witness. Night came gentle. Someone started a tune. Noko answered with his reed. Caleb whistled harmony and surprised a smile out of his own face. May sat on the pump-house step with coffee and let the day put its head on her lap. Jonah sat beside her and did not reach for her hand, which is its own kind of courage. What now? He asked. Keep untangling, she said. Fix what will become lies if we don't. He nodded toward the church. Bars under hymnals, he said. I never thought I'd like that sentence. You do, she said. So do I. She closed the pump-house door, not locked, just shut, the way you close your eyes when you trust the room. In the mercantile window, the blank back of a sign had quit being a threat. A boy had chalked a crooked star in the corner. It would wash away. That wasn't the point. On the board, under the rule, someone had written 3 words and drawn a small square like a house. Not 1 month. Mrs. Bell pursed her lips at the grammar and let it live. The wheels slowed to night speed, and the reed kept a small, stubborn song. Kincaid coughed without blood and watched a sky he hadn't earned and said, To no one and to God, thank you. Carter folded his copy of the addendum and tucked it into his vest, the way men tuck pictures of children. Landry slept the first honest night of his year. May walked one last lap in the dark. She checked the vent, the slit, the latch, the bar, the lamp. She checked her own breath and found it easier. At the old board, she added one more line, small as a thread. Maps are promises kept. She smiled because someone else would find it in the morning and think it had been there all along. She went to bed, boots at the threshold, knife under the pillow out of habit, not fear. In the last second before sleep, she felt the ground say a good night in that same low voice that had coaxed her to stay. Still here, still water, still us. Tomorrow the wheel turns again, and so do we all. Amen. Before you ride out, take a breath. What moment hit you hardest? The first clean cup of water, the wheel remembering, or the chalked words, maps are promises kept? Tell me in the comments what you would have done at that crossroads, or the line you'd add to this town's map. And if you want more quiet, hard-won wonders from the Old West, subscribe to Frontier Miracles and ring the bell, so the next trail finds you first. Your comment keeps this campfire burning. Your subscription helps us bring the frontier back to life.